Okay, so good morning, everyone. It's morning here. I don't know where else everybody else is, but good day to everybody, and welcome to our webinar where we'll be discussing the second of a series of 3 country studies that have been done. The first was done on Kazakhstan. That was in November, and this is the second one, and the next one will be Brazil coming up in 2021. So that's something else to look forward to. My name is Gloria Majiga, and I will be your moderator today. I am a national coordinator for Publish What You Pay Malawi, but I also sit in the Global Council representing Anglophone Africa. So I'm very excited to be here today and see everyone. We haven't seen each other in so long, but it's really nice to still be able to get together and have these kinds of discussions. So today we'll be having a discussion about the report. It's titled "What's in it for us?" Hashtag waiting we gain. I had to practice saying that a few times, but I think it's a really catchy hashtag, and I would like to hear I look forward to hearing a little more about it and how it came about and what it means. So this is an action research case study that was done on the Nigeria's extractive industries. It is a result of collaboration between Policy Alert, which is a Publish What You Pay Nigeria member, and Publish What You Pay UK. There's also a contribution from Stakeholder Democracy Network, which is a Publish What You Pay UK member. Now, let me not take up more time. I'm very excited to introduce my panel today. This panel, they're also the authors of the report, and they'll be sharing a little more about it and the contents and the process and the results and the potential impacts, and also just sharing with you how you can undertake similar studies in different regions and countries. They'll also be answering every question you have, hopefully every question. And you can also share your experiences, and I think it would be good to reflect on your own experiences from the work that they have done. So this morning, we'll be hearing from Tija Bolton-Akpan. Tija is the head of programs from Policy Alert. Hi, Tija. Tija will be sharing with us about the recommendations, the findings, and the recommendations of the report. We'll also be hearing from Inyobong Usen. He's the Senior Research and Policy Analyst. Hi, Inyobong, with budget. Sandrine will be sharing a bit more of their profiles, so don't worry about it. You can also get their contacts very likely, so you get to know them in the discussion. And Inyobong will share with us the how. How did the research go, the methodology, and how you can replicate that in your countries. We'll also be hearing from Calvin Lane. Calvin is the acting executive director for Stakeholder Democracy Network. And he'll be talking a little bit about the SDN's Environmental Performance Index. Very, very interesting. And the All Money for Development report. And finally, we'll be hearing from Miles Litvinov, who is the coordinator for Publish What You Pay UK. Hi, Miles. He's also the Global Council representative for Europe and North America. And he'll be talking a little bit about the partnership and collaboration and the strengths in the global coalition. So welcome everybody, welcome to my panel. Please feel free, we're very excited to hear from you this morning. I'll give each of you 10 minutes to speak, and so that we have enough time for a good discussion. I'll also invite you, our participants, to share your experiences and your questions in the chat box. So as the presentations are being made, you can write down your questions, and then when we come to the questions time, I'll read them out for you. So without much ado, please, Tija. Hi, Tija, please unmute.
Yes, Gloria, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right.
Yeah, so the first presentation comes from you. Are you sharing a presentation, Sandrine? Great, thank you. Take it away, Tija.
Right, thanks, Sandrine, for sharing that. So, hi everyone, good morning. Nice to have you all here. My name is Tija once again. I work for Policy Alert. Policy Alert is an NGO based in Akwa Ibom State, Nigeria, South, needless to say, that's the oil producing region of the country. The work we do seeks to deepen citizens' engagement with policy and legislative processes at the subnational level, while we also engage city and ensure that social, economic, and ecological outcomes are fair, sustainable, and work for the citizens. Now, one of the ways we do this is by ensuring or pushing government to put in place policies that improve the extractive sectors, and also engaging with communities to ensure that they have the tools to get better benefits from natural resources and also minimize the negative social and environmental impacts of the sector on their communities. Over the past 2 years, it's been interesting and also fun working with Publish What You Pay UK and the SDN in specific ways to interrogate the data on what companies pay to the Nigerian government and how these funds are utilized, whether they are well utilized or not in addressing the needs of the communities. So I'll be sharing with you some of the findings from this, but just before we do that, it would be nice to get into a bit of the context. Nigeria has done like 65 years of oil and gas exploration and exploitation. And Nigeria's economy depends disproportionately on the extraction of oil and gas. Unfortunately, there is a kind of paradox of plenty where we see so much oil and gas wealth, but very little in terms of social and economic development and impacts for the communities that are living in the midst of this extraction. One of the indices we can look at once is the Human Development Index, where Nigeria's most recent score was 158 out of 189 countries. And then the National Bureau of Statistics recently published that 40% of the total population of Nigeria, that is 83 million people, live below the poverty line. So this actually underscores the kind of paradox that Nigerians live in, a lot of oil wealth and very little to show for it. Yes, there have been a lot of efforts at reforms. We have had the Nigeria Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, and then there is a supportive policy environment emerging where you have the EITI reports that have been published annually, and recently as 2016, the OGP, which has extractive sector specific commitments. Hopefully the PIB2 will join, very soon to consolidate these reforms. What's the premise for intervention? Our understanding is that natural resource payments and receipts are critical for citizens to be able to demand accountability. And if we are able to provide that data, bring that data close to citizens, it will help them press for reforms and also enable government to spend in ways that benefits the citizens more. So what I'm going to be doing next is go into the findings proper. What did we find in the in this action research? This is rather trite, but we found that the Nigerian extractive sector is still very large, complex, and poorly governed. So a lot of issues related to corruption, issues related to illicit financial flows, poor accountability to citizens, poor servicing of the communities that host these extractive projects. And then also a lot of negative impacts on the host and impacted communities' livelihood. So whether you look at environment, health, human rights. There is a whole lot of negative externalities that are yet to be compensated for. Then there is this also very striking finding that the multinational oil companies are actually paying. Yes, we could argue that there is a lot more they need to pay, and there is also a lot more transparency and accountability that needs to happen in how they pay and what they pay. But we found that 359 million US dollars were paid to just one government agency in 2018. That's the Niger Delta Development Commission. So, this is the government agency that is responsible for facilitating equitable and sustainable developments in the Niger Delta region, the region that hosts most of the oil operations in Nigeria. So this particular finding really goes to show that the receipts from oil and gas sector are not really translating to development for the people, because you go to the Niger Delta, you find a lot of people still living in poverty. They have human development indices that are far below the national average. Unemployment is rife, and so on. Then we also have a situation where when we went out into the field, we found most of the communities complaining about abandoned projects by this same government agency. And you need to note that this is an agency that is paid 3% of the annual budgets, operating budgets of the oil and gas companies operating in the region. We also noted that there is very little fairness in how benefits from oil and gas proceeds are shared back to the people of the region. Then it is one of the most significant findings of this report is that the work that we do as civil society is important in driving accountability, in ensuring that governments and companies are actually brought to account for what they're doing. But we also noted that this needs to go further, that international organizations need to invest in the capacity of civil society. I will deal with this a bit more during the recommendations. Also, we noted that the payments to government reports, that is the compulsory reporting that companies in the UK, Norway, Canada, the EU are expected to make into their home country governments on what they pay to countries where they are operating. These reports are actually a very useful contribution to accountability in the host countries of those operations. So like we saw in this particular intervention, the reports really filled a lot of gaps. So for instance, while we have the Nigeria Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative releasing annual reports, these reports, sometimes are, a year or two, backwards in terms of the currency. So what we were able to achieve with the PTG reports is that we got reports that were more current, and the demands for remediation were actually not stale by the time we pushed them to the entities that we wanted to engage. Then we also found that there is need for disclosure of extractive contracts and fiscal terms, that there is no way we can depend on just the reports within the framework of the EITI and even the PTG to understand the full scope, the full range of what's happening within the extractive sector. And for community leaders and civil society to be able to demand accountability in a meaningful way, they need to have access to contracts, they need to have access to fiscal terms, they need to be able to know who is behind the companies that are operating, extracting oil and gas in the region. So beneficial ownership and contract transparency disclosure are very key. In fact, we realize that it is more like a transparency triangle. So we have the payment disclosures on the one leg, we have the beneficial ownership disclosure on the other leg, and the contract transparency. So by the time accountability actors utilize the full range of these disclosures, they get a clear picture, they get the big picture of what's happening, and they're able to demand accountability in a meaningful way. Unfortunately, we noted that the disclosure regimes, especially for beneficial ownership that currently exists, for instance, the UK's people with significant control register still has, areas where it permits, companies to cut corners and escape being fully transparent. So I'm going to comment on our recommendations in a moment on that. We also, throughout the report, there is an emphasis on the fact that the bottom is running out of the oil and gas sector, that Nigeria is one of those countries that appears to be ill-prepared for the low-carbon energy transition, and that it is important for the industry and also for citizens to have a clear picture of how prepared, where the industry stands within the stream of time, vis-a-vis the reserves, vis-a-vis investment inflows, and so on, so that they can be an informed, choice of options for sustainable development in the face of the fact that there is an imminent transition from fossil fuels, to renewable energy, and there will be, stranded assets all over the region very soon if Nigeria does not embrace this quickly. And with those stranded assets will come stranded communities. So the earlier Nigeria embraces the energy transition, the better, so that these communities can actually get the promise of oil that they were offered before it becomes too late. Now, what are the recommendations? The recommendations to the Nigerian government include that there should be a fast-track passage of the petroleum industry bill. This is a bill that is has been lingering for close to 2 decades, and it will end up splitting the mammoth National Oil Company of Nigeria into different entities that will be commercially competitive, and also set up a regulatory, arm that will also address regulatory functions independently rather than marrying the two. And then there is also going to be within that bill a framework for local participation and grievance redress. This is something that has been on the table very recently and very hot, and we've had assurances from the National Assembly in Nigeria that this bill will be passed by this month. There is also in our recommendations a demand for the NDDC to publish monthly and online open data format, the NDDC's receipts from the government and from companies. So we have compared, for instance, what the NDDC receives, to what subnational governments in the region receives. And it will surprise you to note that the NDDC is a super government if we look at the kind of come to it, from the federation account. Add to this the 3% it receives from the companies, then it's really befuddling to note that the impact on the ground belies these resource flows. Then another recommendation is that there should be mechanisms within the NDDC to involve communities in needs assessment, planning, and to promote ownership and sustainability of projects. So wherever you go, you see abandoned projects of the Commission, and you notice that a lot of the work that they do is not completed. Then on gas flaring, we noted that the fines for gas flares currently are shared to different parts of the country, the different federating units. But the demand of the communities as we engaged with them was that they suffer the brunt of gas flares, and they need, to be treated as priority in allocating the gas flare penalty payments. We also recommended that there should be an update of the public register of extractive industry contracts to include community development agreements, very importantly, and that the contract disclosure regime, should be incorporated into the overarching legislation for the oil and gas industry. That's the PIB that is coming. Do I still? Okay. Yeah. So our recommendation to the other governments is that the governments of the UK, the EU, and the others should work together to align. Hello, Sandrine?
Hi, Tisha.
Yes.
Please wrap up. You're just about out of time.
Yes. Okay. So let me. Yes. So next slide, please. Good. So our recommendations to the other governments is that the project by project disclosure requirements, there should be an alignment. So there is currently a lot of inconsistency around project by project disclosure. So while we were doing this work, we noticed that a lot of companies were reluctant, to disclose certain projects. They actually aggregated their reporting for certain projects. Like you'll see things like SPDC East, you'll see things like Niger Delta concessions and so on. So these aggregations does not give a clear picture of what's happening, and it makes it difficult for communities to draw a beeline between the operations and which communities are affected. Then for the US especially, I mean, for Akwa Ibom, where we did this, where we did most of this work, ExxonMobil operates there, and this is a company that's registered in the US, and we find that the recent downgrading and watering down of their rules, transparency rules, is really a setback for transparency, globally, especially in this part of the world. So our recommendation here is that the UK should really, the US should really catch up with other countries like Canada, EU, Norway, the UK, and also rejoin the EITI so that they can enforce, very strong payments to government disclosure regime for US registered companies. Finally, I would just like to say that Nigerian civil society has a very strong role to play, and they should continue to put demand, for beneficial ownership to be, very effectively implemented, contract disclosure to be very effectively implemented, and engage with communities, taking the data to them so that they can understand exactly what is being paid to government and what companies are paid, and what government is receiving from the companies, and this can enable them to demand for accountability in a more meaningful way. All in all, we expect that the report that we have presented here is going to enable the community, civil society, host communities, development partners, and even the companies and governments, to rally around and use transparency and accountability to ensure that the natural resources in Nigeria make more meaning for its citizens.
Thank you very much, Tisha. Are you done? I was waiting for the ending.
Yeah, I was giving you a hand signal. Sorry.
Okay. No, thank you very much, Tisha. Very interesting insights. I think that's definitely the meat of the report. The statistics are very shocking, but I won't get into that now. I think we're just going to rush into the next presentation. Inyobong, please get ready for your presentation. Sandrine, please set up the presentation. To everybody who's just joined us, welcome to our webinar today. You're welcome to introduce yourself in the
panel. And please make sure you're putting up your questions in the question and answer section. So there's a section on your webinars. I think we're all pros at this by now. It's been a whole year of doing this. So I'm hoping everybody can find the Q&A function. So you can just type in your questions and then we can get back to them after the panels, the presentations are done. Okay, great. So Sandrine is ready. Thank you, Inyobong. Please take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Gloria. Good morning, everyone. My name is Inyobong, and I'm a senior research and policy analyst at Budget Fund.
Inyobong, we can't hear you.
I'm just diving deep into how we went about the work. Next slide, please. Hello. Hello, am I audible?
Okay, now we can hear you. Please proceed.
Yeah, am I? Okay. Okay, yeah, please, next slide, please.
Sandrine, next slide, please.
Okay, so just going straight into how we utilize the data and went about the work. So like we all know, the most important component of this research was the data. And it was important that whichever data we decided to rely on to carry out our research and conduct our analysis was the right data. We looked at resourceprojects.org for data on payments to government projects in some cases. In some other cases, like Tija earlier mentioned.
Inyobong, we are losing you. Well, perhaps you can turn off your video. Just keep your audio.
Difficult. Yeah, hello.
Hi, Inyobong. Perhaps you can turn off the video because you keep breaking, so it may be the connection.
Hello.
Hi, Inyobong. We can hear you.
Okay. So primary source of data was from the resourceprojects.org portal, where we're able to get disaggregated data for some oil mining leases that we used in carrying out some of our analysis. And knowing that there are several data sources for these kinds of work, we also relied on data from NATI. And we had envisaged that having multiple sources of data might lead to having different figures for the same kinds of payments. And when I move further into my presentation, you'll see instances where payments that were reported by companies according to resourceprojects.org for that's to the NCDMB were different from payments reported by that same company to the NCDMB in that same fiscal year. Another data source that we use, especially for triangulating payments to specific communities, was from the DPR oil and gas industry annual reports. So that report actually had like a table where you could see the concessions, the type of grants, the areas, that's the areas for each acreage, the equity distribution, the terrains, operators, and the duration of the lease of each mining lease. This was very important to be able to allow communities know exactly what it was that the federal government was getting from companies as a result of the resources that were extracted from their domain. Another data source too was from the FAC reports. So that's the monthly disbursements from the federal government to the subnational government. That particular piece of data was important for the analysis we did with cross-comparing what it is that accrued to the NDDC as 3% NDDC levy and statutory allocation from the federal government. It was important to get what also went to the states to be able to determine the magnitude of receipts that actually went to the NDDC as against what went to the Niger Delta states, and also to be able to compare the kinds of responsibilities that are carried out by the NDDC and also the state governments. So just moving straight into how we analyzed and utilized the data. We cross-compared payments to government data from resourceprojects.org and NATI. So for the payments made to the federal government, payments made to interventionist agencies like the NDDC, and payments made to the NCDMB, we took the data from resourceprojects.org and compared it with that was reported also in the NATI reports. And in doing that cross-comparison, we identified disparities in the reporting of payments to government. And a case in point would be the CEPLA payment to the NCDMB in 2016. So the NATI report had reported that CEPLA had paid $1.72 million to NCDMB in 2016, while we found out on the resourceprojects.org portal that CEPLA also reported paying $773,000 to the NCDMB in the same year. That gives a variance of about $1 million. That might appear really small in fiscal terms, but if you look at what that can be used in terms of service delivery for people in the Niger Delta, then you know that that's a lot. So it would cost the government about 420 million naira to build 20 healthcare primary centers in Nigeria at a unit cost of about 20 million naira per primary care center. In today's, going by today's exchange rate, CBN exchange rate, would fetch you 420 million naira. So if you have that sort of disparity that has the magnitude of building 21 primary healthcare centers, that tells you the importance of having the figures right. We also had cases of discrepancies in remittances to government agencies, and also possible undervaluing of Nigeria's oil and gas assets. So in 2016 as well, we discovered a situation where SPDC made in-kind payments to the federal government at more than $28 less than the going market value per barrel for the products produced and sold. And that is huge, considering the fact that the SPDC produces over 300,000 barrels of crude oil per year. If you multiply that by the $28 per barrel shortfall, it will give you an idea of what exactly the country loses to these kinds of deals.
In your phone, I'm going to ask you to wrap up now. We're running out of time.
Okay,
maybe
just quickly through the engagement. So we developed infographics and disseminated. So all of the data that we had analyzed and generated, we had turned them into the infographics and shared them on our various social media platforms. We also engaged in Twitter chats with some industry experts and some civil society leaders in the space on some policy issues. We also had community visits and dialogues with people from extraction affected communities. We also had media engagements on days like the International Women's Day So in this particular picture showing on your screen, next slide, these were women from several oil and gas producing communities that we had facilitated to be on air to express some of the challenges they had with oil and gas exploration in their domains. We also wrote letters to companies and government agencies to seek clarification on issues of concern. We wrote several public statements on policy issues. We engaged with parliament and also had media engagements on radio, in print, and on TV. So in a nutshell, this was how we were able to carry out the action research. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Inyubong. That's very, very interesting indeed. I also especially resonate with the incorporation of specific gender initiatives, gender-related initiatives, to make sure that you are able to differentiate the impacts on that the sector and the bad governance, or at least the lack of good governance, has on women. And I think that's a really good way of ensuring that you are being inclusive and that our recommendations reflect the different needs. I will now invite Calvin. Calvin, are you ready? Sandrine, do we have our presentation ready?
Yes, that's all right. I'll share my screen, Gloria. Thanks so much. And yes, thank you to Policy Alert. Really commend them for, what's some quite complex work to do. So it's really great to hear about it. So thanks again, Gloria. So my name's Calvin. I work at SDN. I've been asked to speak briefly on a couple of ways that we've been using data to try and understand the impact of the oil and gas industry on communities in the Niger Delta, and in turn to sort of spur on action on the basis of that data. Very quick bit of background. SDN, we're an NGO. We've worked in the Niger Delta since 2004. We're Port Harcourt based in Rivers State, although we have a small team here in London in the UK where I'm based as well. We were set up to support those affected by and promote good governance within the oil and gas sector in the Niger Delta. So you've kind of heard this from Tija and Inyubong already, but sort of might be needless to say that host communities in the Niger Delta have seen very little benefit for the oil and gas industry, but have often borne the brunt of the worst impacts. So be that oil spills, gas flares, kind of conflict and weak governance, which has resulted from the political economy of the region, which has been influenced by the existence of the oil and gas industry. And with these problems, it's often hard to really fully understand the nature and scale of them, because data is often poor, partial, hard to access, hard to make use of, not known about. So this is often one key barrier to action, or more effective action on these issues. So I'm going to talk very quickly about two recent initiatives of SDN's. The first is the Environmental Performance Index. Very briefly, what this aims to do is understand the overall environmental emissions of the oil industry. In our first edition, we focused on oil spills and gas flares, but it also attempts to make a comparative assessment of the performance of oil companies in the Niger Delta. It does this looking at 5 key metrics. So total oil spilled, number of oil spills, oil spill removal rate, so cleanup, volume of gas being flared, and what we call an emissions ratio. So how much oil is being spilled and gas being flared in comparison to how much oil a company is producing. And we get that data from a number of locations, including the Nigerian Gas Flare Tracker and Oil Spill Monitor, which are sort of tools of the regulator and the National Oil Spill Detection Response Agency. SDN helped develop these tools. Also official government statistics like, as we've mentioned earlier, the DPR, Nigerian Oil and Gas Industry Annual Report. I'm not going to talk about this. You can go onto our website, stakeholderdemocracy.org, and to find the index and its reports. So I'm not going to talk about this graph, but basically the index comes out in this way, making a comparative assessment of the environmental performance of all operating oil and gas companies in the Niger Delta. We've also published the database for this, so you can go in, look at all the data, make use of it, to perform your own analysis. That's all on our website. And this allows us to do some really useful analysis. So here's an example of a graph from the report showing total oil spilled by local government area. So already we're able to take a bird's eye view of where do the problems appear to be particularly bad in the Niger Delta. So very quickly, what are some of the outcomes and key messages from this work so far? The first thing to say is we first published this index last year. So this is our first time doing it. We want this to become a long-term engagement process with government, regulators, and communities and the industry to sort of build consensus on the facts of the problem, to collaborate and find ways, new solutions to this sort of historic problem in the Niger Delta. What we found is by taking this more systematic data-led approach, looking across the Niger Delta at oil spills, gas flaring, and so on, it's helped develop new understanding and analysis of the problem. So here's a few examples. I mean, to state the obvious, there's an ongoing high level of pollution in the Niger Delta. But the second point is quite an interesting one. When you look at how the Nigerian industry performs against the global average, it does appear to be particularly problematic, with spill and gas flare volumes being way above the average for the amount of production that's going on. And thirdly, what we see is the majority of emissions are coming from international companies and the national oil company, which is expected because they are producing oil in much greater volumes. But when we look at local operators, we see that compared to their production, in relative sense, they're emitting more, committing more oil spills, gas flaring, and so on. So that has implications in a context where international oil companies are increasingly divesting from the Niger Delta, and we're seeing local operators play an increasing role. And finally, on the environmental performance index, so we've found that taking this data-led approach has helped us to open up richer conversations with the oil and gas industry and potential new avenues for engagement. So we've had some quite positive discussions with certain actors, but it's also shown that we have quite a long way to go to even agree on some of the basic facts with our engagements in the industry. And one of the key problems to that is the lack of and or inconsistent data remains a key barrier. So we think that sort of the volume of oil spills is probably highly underestimated. And when people are able to pick holes in the data, this is a reason used by some industry operators to not really engage with this research. They'll say, until we have perfect data, then we can't have a proper conversation. And it's nigh on impossible to get perfect data. On the positive side, we've really had a high level of interest from the regulator, the National Spills Detection and Response Agency, who are actually keen on adopting this approach and making this a joint initiative of SDN and the regulator. That's something we need to think about, because we also, as an NGO, want to retain a level of independence in publishing this. So very quickly, second thing I want to talk about is our Oil Money for Development report. And what we set out to do with this report was challenge ourselves to think about how we're making use of international financial transparency initiatives to make them useful and relevant for the communities we're working with in the Niger Delta. So what the report does is it tracks revenue to the Niger Delta Development Commission. I think both Iniobong and Tija have mentioned who the commission is, so I won't say much about that. But we're able to see revenues going into the commission because of the 3% levy paid, which is disclosed in payment to government data and NATI data. We had access to 2 years worth of budgets for NDDC, which is not always easy to access. So we're able to see how that money is being spent or proposed to be spent. And then we worked with 6 communities to track 133 projects in those budgets on the ground. So some of the key findings, I've just got 2 slides, so I'll wrap up very shortly. So the first key finding is, how powerful working with communities, bringing together this data on payments to government and using government budgets is. So when these 6 communities went out to look at NDDC projects, they found that 50% of them either had encountered significant problems. For example, they may have been abandoned or just could not be found at all. So this gives communities an opportunity, when they're armed with greater data on the revenues going into a government body and can see the budgets, to potentially create greater leverage and accountability. What we do think, though, from this experience is it's great to have payment to government data, but if you don't have the budget from government in terms of how money is going to be spent, there's a real gap there in terms of how we can create accountability. And the final thing here is we think that there's a conceptual problem to overcome here in the Niger Delta, because it's not the case that revenue coming from an oil company in a particular location is automatically allocated to a particular area. So how do we create that level of accountability so that communities can get action using this data? And this is what the report basically says, and this is my last slide. So a possible approach for us to start using this international transparency initiatives on financial data is, first, we can use that data to analyze the geographical distribution of where revenue is being generated from. So if we have project level data, we know where revenue, which oil mining licenses, what money is coming from, and where they are located. Secondly, we can then analyze what the geographical distribution of proposed government spending is if we have access to budgets. These two things together allow us to have an engagement at the level of policy and a discussion with government, in this case the NDDC, about the big picture. So where is money coming from and where is it being spent? We're of course not expecting a 1-to-1 ratio, and that's not how it works. But if we see an area where huge amounts of revenues are being generated from and barely any money is being spent there, it suggests there's a problem, and it gives us an opportunity to engage on that policy and to try and improve it. The final link then is our work, as also Policy Alert has been doing, in communities to then track budgeted projects. And what this allows us to do is then actually look at impact for communities on the ground. Are they getting value for money and for all the revenues that are coming in for the supposed projects that are being budgeted, and then what's happening in their communities? And as I say, if communities then have that payment to government data on the one hand, and they can see government budgets, it gives them a much better possibility to engage with government to get action. And this is the kind of work that we're now doing with, and have been doing for several years, in fact, with those 6 communities mentioned in this report. And they've been quite successful in getting projects delivered in their areas, but this is quite a new thing as using payment to government data. And I will stop there. Back over to you, Gloria.
Thank you, Calvin. Very brilliant. Please remember to type your questions into the question and answer box. Miles, please get ready with your presentation. We'll immediately jump into Miles's presentation, and I'll just ask that we'll take an extra 10 minutes after 12 or after 11 and just answer the questions. Miles, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Sandrine. Good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here on this webinar. Working with colleagues, and Tija Inyambong and I worked together on this project for about 2 years, and Calvin's been a part of it too, and it's been very satisfying, but it also shows us the huge challenges we're up against. So I'm just gonna, I've got a couple of slides, I'll be very quick. So working in partnership, this has been really key to it, and the key strength of Publish What You Pay is it's the only global coalition movement working only on extractive industries in civil society, and that map from the Publish What You Pay international website gives some indication. We also have colleagues in Latin America as well, I'm pleased to say. So we have that strength, and this project sought to leverage that strength. We know that the North has exploited the South for centuries, and it's important that we use our partnerships working together to challenge and reverse those dynamics, and we also to use our complementary strengths. So that's what we set out to do in this partnership, to leverage the global movement, challenge historic power dynamics, and use our complementary strengths. And I hope our colleagues in Nigeria will agree that there was no northern imposition on southern civil society in this project. Just to compare the contribution from the Global South and Global North, and here, as the map indicates, I'm putting the Global South first. So partners like Policy Alert have first-hand knowledge of the issues in the country and the legal context and the social and economic context. They're much closer to impacted communities, and although, like Inyabong, I think the data was really important for this project, I think one of the most valuable aspects of it was the outreach that Policy Alert did to impacted communities, visits, interviews, meetings, public consultation meetings. I think they really give the report a lot more validity than if we'd have all just been sitting at our desks. In-country contacts, So with government bodies, with other civil society organizations, and the legitimacy of this report. It's not a report done by the civil society in the North about the global South. It's a report done globally, North and South, and I think that gives our recommendations and our findings more authority. But of course, we in the global North also have things to contribute. We're closer, particularly to the Northern Company headquarters and to governments in the North. And in the course of this project, Publish What You Pay UK was able to facilitate contacts between the project partners and Chevron in Canada, well, Chevron in the US, but about their Canadian subsidiary, Shell, Seplat, companies that are based in the global North. And we also had some contacts with regulators in Canada and the UK. We understand the Northern legal context better, so the payment to government reports that we accessed were enacted under Northern laws in Canada and the UK, particularly in this case, but also in European Union and Norway. And usually the sad fact is that if a Northern civil society organization is writing to, say, a company or a government body in the global North, we're more likely to get a response than if it's the Southern civil society partner alone. So I think that's really where we can lend some strength and support. And just to look a bit more at our sort of process. So as I think Tija and Inyobong will recall, not necessarily always with pleasure, I mean, we spoke, we used Skype, we spoke for about an hour every week or every 2 weeks for about 2 years in order to make sure that we understood each other, we had common objectives, we knew what each other's complementary strengths were, we did our joint planning and coordination and implementation with a lot of thinking together. And then, of course, you've seen these images of what Policy Alert contributed. I think it's been extremely valuable, and you know, they conceived the whole idea of wet in we gain, which Gloria, you were asking the meaning. I understand it's Nigerian pidgin for what's in it for us, hence the title of our report. We could not have done such an effective project without the work of Tija and Inyobong and their colleagues, but also SDN's contribution was really valuable. They helped us plan. We wrote letters together to some of the companies. We were very happy to incorporate their research on environmental impacts, and SDN are really great in using and seeing potential value in the payments to governments data, which we would like to see more Northern members of Publish What You Pay globally using, and SDN helped us promote it. Publish What You Pay's UK's contribution was joint planning, as I said, research. We did fact-checking, data analysis. We wrote letters to the company HQs, or we led on those letters. We led on compiling and drafting the report and on working with the all-important International Secretariat, who contributed tremendously in terms of supporting the production, publication and promotion. And this webinar itself is very much owes a lot to the International Secretariat. So I'll stop there. Thanks very much. And hopefully there'll be a bit of time for questions and discussions.
Thank you so much, Miles. That was short and sweet. I found it very interesting. I think you mentioned in one of the discussions, either on the Twitter chat, where you said that you had never actually interacted physically. And I think in the changing context now with COVID, everything is changing. And so it's incredible that you were able to come up with such a detailed and very brilliant report without having to physically interact with each other and also with the different companies. So I think that's also really encouraging to say that we can still do this. We're still able to use the data. We don't have to stop holding companies accountable or our governments accountable. There's still a lot of opportunities to work together. And especially within the coalition, we have so much resources just with each other. And I think those are very good opportunities for us to continue to explore. I'll get right into the questions. We have quite a number of questions. I'll just remind everyone to please move your questions into the Q&A so I don't miss any of your questions. We'll quickly get into that. So we have a question here from Blessing, who is asking, how do we demand transparency and accountability from a system that has two conflicting information acts? which is the Official Secret Act and the Freedom of Information Act. I'm assuming Tija or Inyobong, you probably want to take that one. I'll just read out a couple more. You have stated a lot of recommendations, but what are some of the measures that you have put in place to follow up these recommendations? This also goes out to Tija. Did the report consider corporate social responsibility versus all rent or tax, especially for host communities? Did it bring to bear the responsibilities of communities vis-a-vis what is in for the communities? How realistic can home countries support host countries in keeping a check on companies to align with EITI standards? So Miles is going to answer that question. Perhaps Tija, we can start with you. And you can also just share a bit on the gender dynamics. It's a question from Henry again to ask what are the gender dynamics found out by the study? I'll give you one minute, Tija.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Gloria. Okay, so quickly on the information disclosure regimes, it's really a challenge in Nigeria, where we have a Freedom of Information Act at the national level, but at the states, we have a lot of conflicting responses from state actors where you make demands for information and you get excuses like it doesn't apply in the states. But we know that the FOI covers the ground, and we have been able to get, data from some state institutions related to the oil and gas sector. On recommendations, how we are going to follow up on these, the Waiting We Gain campaign, we want to actually imbue it with a lot of staying power so that it doesn't end with this report, but we continue to use it as the overarching framework for engagements within the oil and gas sector. So whether it has to do with remediation of issues arising from native oil and gas reports, or engaging on contract transparency issues, or beneficial ownership, or community, beneficiation and socioeconomic, impacts of oil and gas operations in the communities, as we find during the current PIB engagement that's going on at the National Assembly. We are weaving in mainstreaming the recommendations of this report into all these subsequent engagements, and we hope to do that a lot more going forward. Henry, on corporate social responsibility, yes, so one of the recommendations of this report is that the PIB should be expected expeditiously passed, and the chapter 3 of the PIB actually addresses post is in effect some responsibility regime that is currently in place. So we are actually demanding for, in this report, our recommendation is that the government should pass the PIB, quickly and get to work on actually reforming the sector. Communities actually have a huge responsibility. They have.
Hi, Tija, we're losing you.
Okay, yes, I just turned off my video now. I hope it helps. So, yes, so communities have a huge responsibility. Communities need to engage a lot more with the companies. Like what we found out, a lot of the communities are not aware that there are actually agreements between the companies and their communities. And this brings us to the issue of captors that we found, and working in the communities. Within the traditional rulers, within the youth leadership, sometimes you find that there are certain, very powerful elements who work in cohorts with the companies to deprive the communities of their benefits. So it's important for the communities to actually begin to understand what the data says. Like Calvin said, once you understand the data, it gives you power to be able to make demands that are informed, and the engagement of the communities with companies on the one hand and government on the other will move beyond what we call we no go green these parts. So it will move beyond emotionalism, and it will move to actual empirical evidence-based demands. So that's something that communities can do, and I hope that civil society will play its role in building this capacity within communities.
Thank you so much, Tija. We have another question that Miles will be taking. Miles, do you want to respond to that quickly?
Yes, thanks, Gloria. Yeah, so there were two questions. The one on corporate social responsibility. I think my understanding of this is that if this is a corporate social responsibility or corporate responsibility, these are voluntary initiatives by companies. We shouldn't be depending on the goodwill of companies and their voluntary initiatives to ensure that oil and other minerals extraction takes place without damaging communities. We didn't go into it in depth, but I mean, I have looked at corporate responsibility, company policies and practices in other contexts, and we shouldn't rely on them. There should be a fair deal for the host government, for the host communities, and for citizens of the country when their resources are extracted, and also for future generations, ideally, because these resources will not last forever. Home countries do have a responsibility, and one of my concerns is that a home country government like the UK, although yes, they've enacted payment to government legislation, and European countries, including the EU, the UK, are looking at non-financial reporting to improve it so there's greater accountability. Not enough is done to keep the companies in check, and that's really a serious problem, I think. Just very briefly, on the community development agreements that Tija responded to, I recall that one of the key findings we had was that a lot of the communities just didn't know about these agreements and didn't have access to them. So there's a huge area of secrecy there that really needs to be exposed. Thanks.
Thank you, Miles. I actually found that quite interesting as well, Miles, in terms of the level of engagement, especially the issues of the contract. I think it's one thing we have been talking about is that you usually get to, if you at all see the contract, it will be after they've already been signed. So committers are not even part of the process of the contracting and the agreements, which is also a huge problem. And it brings us to a question raised here by Paul. He talks about Malawi intends to go into serious oil and gas exploration in the near future. So he's asking, what's one thing you can say to Malawi government, but also CSOs to look out for in order to better the industry for the benefit of local communities? And I'm hoping, Calvin, you can answer this as well with Inyobong. And I was just wondering if you could also link it to the question, one issue that you raised in your presentation, where you talked about how benefit sharing schemes haven't yielded much fruits. How in the future for countries that are still getting into exploration and perhaps into mining and extraction, how do we make these arrangements actually work so they actually start benefiting something? How do we get to that point? Because then my concern is that if CSR is not working, then how do the benefit sharing agreements work? How can they be improved? Quick 1 minute.
Shall I go first, Gloria?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. I think very relevant question. I think the Niger Delta sort of can provide a lot of lessons for countries where extraction is starting. So I think one thing what's gone wrong in the Niger Delta, one thing has been, in our opinion, is the failure to separate environmental regulation of the industry from wider regulation. So you have a set part of government which is incentivized to maximize production and revenue from the industry, and which is also pretty powerful, and there's been a sort of a failure to properly separate responsibilities for environmental regulation. So those that do have a responsibility for environmental regulation are not very well funded, and the legislative framework is not as strong as it should be. You know, for example, if it comes to compensation for communities that experience oil spills. So I think really paying sharp attention to the legislative framework, regulatory framework that's being set up to ensure that on the environmental side of things, there's a really robust, strong, well-funded regulator. And obviously, it's kind of me talking from SDN's particular focus on the environmental aspects of the industry. In terms of making sure that communities also benefit, I mean, it's a challenging question, but I think, you know, it's again about trying to have robust and clear processes in place for in what ways are communities going to benefit. We're not expecting, you know, all money to plow back just into host communities. Of course, there's a wider national benefit, but there needs to be a clear spell out way that government is not just, you know, it shouldn't just be about CSR for companies. Ultimately, you know, it's government's responsibility to be providing basic services and so on. So how are revenues from the oil and gas industry going to be allocated in some form back to host communities to ensure that they're seeing some kind of benefit and also avoiding the worst impacts of the industry? I'll stop there and hand over to Iniobong or anyone else who wants to comment on that.
Okay, so the PIB provides a framework for benefit transfer to host communities. However, there are issues we've had with some of the provisions in that bill. For instance, on the board of trustees for the management of the Community Development Trust Fund, there's been no room for communities to actually be represented on that board. So at the highest decision-making level regarding the community trust funds, communities are left out. Also, in terms of who determines what exactly is a host community, the legislation has also left that to the companies to decide. We have also seen that that's also going to be a huge area for contention in the future, considering the fact that a lot of times these communities jostle for whatever it is they can get from the oil companies. So if the governments do not clearly state exactly the communities that are captured as host communities to these assets, it poses a danger for resource distribution in the future. And those are just my thoughts on that. On the gender dynamics in the report, of course, the report captured some gender issues that had occurred in the community. So in a particular community in this selected, for instance, there was an instance where women were prevented from accessing their farms just because the farms were close to extraction sites. And those those portions of land were not paid for. So those instances, we discovered such instances. Also in Equinor, also where Mobil operates, we had complaints from fisher folks who were women that were prevented from accessing areas in the sea where they would traditionally go to fish. And that had implications for their yield in terms of fishing. And also in terms of health-related issues, for the HIV survey done in a lot of those areas, we discovered that those riverine areas that were predominantly host communities, had the highest prevalence rates of HIV and AIDS. So these are some of the key gender dimension issues that the report addressed.
Thank you, Iniobong.
Sorry, Gloria, if I could just quickly as well, just on this question on Malawi, I'd say also very welcome to contact SDN directly. Although we're focused in the Niger Delta, we'd be very willing, if we're able, to engage in a conversation to try and share experiences and what could be done differently.
Thank you, Calvin. I think those were your last words. Any last words, Tisha? I think we're completely out of time. As Calvin has said, I think you can contact anybody that was on this panel, and I think there's a lot of scope for collaboration and to answer any other questions. This is just a start of the conversation, but there's a lot more room to have more discussions around this. Miles, 1 second.
Too little, but just to say thanks everybody for participating. Please read the report. Our email addresses are at the back of it. Let us know what you think about it and how it can be continue this work, which Policy Alert certainly will do, and Publish What You Pay UK will support if we can, where we can.
Thank you. Inyabong, Tija.
All right, so thank you, everyone. Thank you, Publish What You Pay Secretariat for supporting this effort. Thank you, Publish What You Pay UK for the technical, partnership. Thank you, SDN, and thank you, everyone who has collaborated. We want to continue this partnership, and we hope others, do the little bit they can following some of the things we've experimented here.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to say thank you, Miles. Thank you, Tija. Thank you, Calvin, for this wonderful journey. It was an excellent report. And thank you, everyone, for joining the webinar. Bye.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for still staying on with the extra 17 minutes. We really appreciate your time this morning and your contributions. As everybody has said, you're welcome to contact any of the panelists and follow up on some of the questions. Sandrine, do you have on hand a link to the report that you can just share in the chat box? You can also access it on the Publish What You Pay website. Okay, so thank you so much, everybody. Calvin, my panelists, you guys have been so awesome. It's an interesting report. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it, and I look forward to taking up the lessons and adapting them in our own country. Thank you, Miles, for sharing the report. You can all access the report in the chat box. We also have a survey. As you exit, there'll be a short survey. It's very brief. Please fill it out for our feedback and just so that we know how to improve these webinars. Thank you, everybody. I'm waiting for Inyabong to say waiting we gain.
Thank you, everyone.
It's waiting we gain. Waiting we
gain. Thank you.
Yeah, waiting we gain. Thank you, Gloria. Thanks, everyone. Yeah.